All right. Well, welcome back to our daily Bible reading discussion. And I'm Todd, and I have Kelvin with me. He'll be with me one more week, and you'll finish your stint here, guiding us
Then
through
you're
this.
going to run me off. Huh?
Run you off. I'll give you a
Okay.
break.
All
Give you a
right.
break. We'll
All
move
right.
on to some fresh blood out here. But
Good. I need a break.
I was just talking to Calvin, and this has been good for me as we get together just to keep me honest and keep me on track reading. And I must admit, it's not a daily Bible reading all the time for me. Sometimes it's a weekly Bible reading, but it's good to be in God's Word. And today we're going to continue in 1 Samuel and then get into 2 Samuel, as well as we continue to look at that relationship between Saul and David and the changing of the guard in that story. And then in the New Testament, John chapter 9 through chapter 13, where we start getting into the last week of Jesus's life and the events surrounding the upper room, where Jesus is kind of saying goodbye, preparing his disciples for his departure. All right, so we'll pick up the story there in 1 Samuel chapter 20 and in verse 1. So, all right, we're going to try to move a little bit faster through the Old Testament so that we can get to the New Testament.
All right.
There you go.
Todd's going to help me do that.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Good. Okay. 1 Samuel 20, we find that, David knows Saul's trying to kill him,
Oh, yeah. The secret's out.
He's made more than one attempt already, and he just says, I know he's trying to kill me. He talks to Jonathan, his good friend, Saul's son. He says, I just don't understand why Saul wants to kill me.
Right.
And Jonathan says, well, I don't think he is. I don't think he is.
He's caught in a difficult position.
He tells me everything important, and he hasn't said anything about that to me.
Right.
So David said, well, you find out and let me know. They took an oath between themselves. They reaffirmed their friendship with one another. And a strong bond of love and friendship that they reaffirmed. But the fact was that Saul really was trying to kill kill David.
Yes.
And Jonathan, in his conversations, it comes out. He realizes how angry and determined his father is, and so he warns David to flee.
Yeah.
And chapter 21, we find that David is fleeing. He comes to a place called Nob, and Ahimelech is the priest there. And David has some men with him, but they don't have any provisions.
Right.
And he asks the priest, "Can you help me?" But he does not tell the priest that he's on the run.
Yeah.
He says, "Why are you by yourself?"
A little white lie here.
I didn't know you were coming. He said, "Well, I had to leave on a quick mission, and I didn't have time even to bring him my provisions or my weapons or anything." So anyway, Elimelech helps him. He doesn't have any regular bread to give him, but he has some of the consecrated bread that they've used and is left over, and said, "Okay, you can take this."
Right.
And so they took the bread, and David says, "I don't even have a weapon. Do you have any weapons?
You have anything laying around?
Have any weapons here?" He says, "Well, the only thing we got is Goliath's sword."
Yeah. So it kind of comes full circle here.
It's been it's wrapped up over there behind the ephod, and if you want it, you can have it.
Yeah. Now I think Jesus is going to reference this event in the Gospels where the showbread or the bread of the presence is eaten by David and his men. It's kind of an exception that is made.
Kind of an exception
in the debate about the Sabbath.
And Jesus uses it in defense of his disciples plucking the grains of on the
Sabbath day, right?
So it says, sometimes the
needs of people supersede
the ritual observations.
Right.
So in chapter 21, David goes on to Gath.
Yep.
There is a king there named Achish.
Lots of different characters. Hard for me to keep them all straight.
Hard for me too. I have to look them up every time. But Gath was a one of the Philistine city states. They say there were 5 Philistine city states. Gath was one of them. And so, he's got his own little local kingdom there, city state. And he welcomes David. David asked for, some chance to stay there, and he does. I'm sorry. That's right. I'm sorry. I'm ahead of myself.
Yeah, Achish is a little suspicious of why David has come to Gath, and so David is kind of
you're
on
right.
to him there.
Farther down is in the next city.
Yeah.
As we said, there's too many things to keep up with.
David pretends to be insane in this particular instance to try to protect himself, and so Achish says, why bother with this guy? And so David hides behind that insanity defense, more or less.
It's kind of sad and funny at the same time. Think of David acting like he's, spittle running down his face and acting like he's insane just to, so they won't see him as a threat of any kind.
Right.
And they let him go. I'm sorry. Thank you.
No, that's right.
As soon as I said it, I said, whoops, that's not what it says there. Okay. The chapter 22, he's at Adullam, and he went into the cave. Well, I think we've all know that story about when David and his men were back in the cave, and said 400 men were with him. David went to Mizpah in Moab. And said to the king of Moab, would you let my father and mother come and stay with you until I learn what God will do for me? So the king of Moab agrees. The Moabites were friendly with David. Remember, David's grandmother had been a Moabite. Let's see, Ruth,
great-grandmother maybe?
Great-grandmother. So he has Moabite blood. And there apparently is still some friendship there. And so the Moabite king says, you can leave your parents here for a while. Then in chapter 22, verse 6, it tells how that Saul kills the priest of Nob. He finds out that Ahimelech has helped David, even though Ahimelech did not know that David was running from Saul. He finds out that he has helped David. And he becomes very angry with him, kills him and all the priests that live in that city. Another sad story. Okay. Chapter 23. David decides to save one of the Israelite towns. Keilah. He's running from Saul. He's running from him. He's having to find shelter among the Philistines or wherever he can find shelter. But in this case, he decides, this, or in this case, the Moabites. At different times, he seeks shelter with different people outside of.
He's on the run.
He's on the run. Yeah. That's right. He's on the run. He's not attacking Saul. He's just trying to stay safe. So the Philistines are fighting against Keilah, and David. That's a Israelite town, and David finds out about it and thinks he needs to go save them. So he does. And Saul then finds out where David is and comes after him, comes chasing after him.
And David flees Keilah because he knows that his presence there is going to put them at jeopardy even. So David goes back on the run.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's interesting that just as Saul is about, toward the end of the chapter, just as Saul is about to catch up with David, he gets a message. Hey, the Philistines have attacked.
Right, and so he's.
Okay, we got to go back and defend.
Right.
And so he was saved.
Yeah.
David was saved from that.
So Saul had to take care of the business.
Because Saul had to turn around
back at home.
Right.
Okay. And so David, that chapter ends with David saying in En Gedi, which is just a kind of an oasis in the desert there.
Right.
For him to find some rest. So En-Gedi sometimes is referred to as just a place that we can go to and find that rest. And God gives it to him during this time. In this unforgiving wilderness, he finds a place where there's water and comfort and peace.
Okay.
So David does find that for a little bit there.
And this is the other cave that I was thinking about a while ago, the cave in En-Gedi, where Saul and his men are hiding back in the cave. David and his men are hiding back in the cave when Saul comes in.
Yeah.
Saul doesn't know that he's back in there.
Right.
David sneaks up on him, cuts off a corner of his robe.
Right.
And
the temptation is there. This is an opportunity to take this guy out, and he's encouraged to,
really
isn't he?
Easy.
Yeah.
And his men would want him to.
Yeah. Hey, here he
But
is.
he said
Saul's
no.
a sitting duck right here.
Right.
Yeah.
But he sees Saul as the Lord's anointed.
It's very
and when
impressive.
the Lord's ready to take care of him, he'll take care of him.
Right.
You know?
David still maintains his very high respect for Saul, and there's going to be another opportunity later on where David could kill Saul again, but David kind of says the same thing.
Yeah.
Who am I to lift up my hand against the Lord's anointed? So he's letting God's timing play out here, while he kind of sits back.
But then, of course, after Saul goes out, David comes out and from a distance shouts to him and says, I could have killed you. He holds up the piece of the robe and lets Saul know, I don't want to kill you. I could have, but I don't want to.
Right.
And it says in chapter 24, verse 16, when David finished saying this, Saul asked, "Is that your voice, David, my son?" And he wept aloud.
Right.
So we find a really strange relationship between Saul and David. Saul, I think, on the one hand, has a soft place in his heart for David.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, his jealousy just overcomes him.
Yeah.
And
he knows that David is going to be the next king. He recognizes David's righteousness. And so Saul is really conflicted.
He's conflicted
among himself about how to deal with David. And so we see almost a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde with Saul. He's praising David, but he's trying to kill him at the same time.
He weeps when he hears his voice, but at the same time,
he asked David at this point also, I know you're going to take over. Please don't totally destroy, don't kill off all of my descendants, which would have been the normal practice if the monarchy was handed over from one family to another. If you were king and I took over, then I'd kill you, I'd kill your children, your grandchildren, so that in the future, none of your descendants would claim that royal title. And so Saul says, hey, leave some of my descendants. So don't kill off my entire
and that kind of
legacy.
Practice continued on through many ages, up until the Middle Ages.
Oh yeah,
later,
So it's not just a biblical practice.
It's a practice been there a long time.
All right, I'm slowing you down here. That's
okay.
Boogie on down the road here.
Is the neat story about David and Nabal and Abigail. Nabal was a rascal,
just a no good,
selfish,
gluttonous person.
He had some shepherds out in the fields that David and his men always kind of protected when they were out there. So David comes to Nabal and says, it's a feast. I know you're going to be preparing some meats and stuff. Is there anything you can give us?
Right.
And Nabal said,
he's a very wealthy man apparently as well.
Said, I'm not going to give you anything.
Give you nothing.
And so, of course, that makes David very angry when he gets the message back, and he's ready to attack Nabal and just wipe him out.
Yeah.
And Abigail, Nabal's wife, who it says was both beautiful and intelligent, which is a very nice combination.
Yes.
She's both beautiful and intelligent. She hears what's happened, and she takes it upon herself to solve this problem. So she gets a lot of food ready and takes it out to David. Says, I heard what Nabal did. It says,
calls him a fool.
He's worthy of his name. His name means fool. That's what he is.
Really great marriage here, it seems, doesn't it?
She
appeases David.
Appeases him.
Right. And David is,
he
had planned on attacking Nabal, and
he says,
could have done
if
it.
you had not come out, she asked him not to shed blood, and so he said, if you had not come out, I would have, but because you've done this, I'll spare him.
Yeah.
And he doesn't attack Nabal, doesn't take his life, but the Lord does. Because just a little while later, after she goes home, and the next day, after Nabal gets over his drunken spell, she tells him what happened, and he almost dies on the spot.
Yeah,
You know,
looks like he
his
just
heart,
dropped it,
I think, was affected.
And then the
It
quickest
says,
proposal in history.
says within about 10 days, the Lord took him.
Yeah.
And then right after that,
Yeah.
David
Yeah.
said, well, there's a good
Hey,
woman that needs a
She's
husband.
smart, she's pretty.
And so he brings Abigail to be his wife. Very interesting story. Okay. Quite a contrast in personalities.
Yes.
Okay, chapter 26, we find David and Abishai, who was Joab's brother. David looks for somebody to go with him into the camp where Saul is at night to again show Saul that I could have killed you, but I'm not going to.
Yeah.
So he asked who'll go with him. Abishai, Joab's brother, said, I will go. And they sneak in the camp at
They're
night.
all asleep.
Everybody's sound asleep.
And apparently God had caused this deep sleep to come over all of the Saul and Abner, his bodyguard, more or less, and everyone else. Yeah.
So David says, Abishai wants us to go ahead and kill Saul.
Again, a sitting
Saul's
duck.
men are always ready to kill Saul.
Right. Well, that's the logical thing to do.
David said, nope, don't do it. Said, let's just take
Lord's
his spear, take his water jug, and we'll leave. That's what they do. And then again, the next day, David calls out from afar and says, look what I've got.
Yeah.
I could have killed you again. But
I like in 26:21, Saul's response. I have sinned. Come back, David, my son, because you considered my life precious today. I will not try to harm you again.
Right. Yeah.
I'll try not to kill you.
Yeah.
Right. Again, Saul.
And I think he meant it probably
Well,
at the moment.
At the moment. Right.
At the moment.
But again, that conflict that Saul has with David.
Poor Saul really is struggling. Yeah. Okay. So, David said, well, I got your spear over here. Send one of the young men over here to get it. I'll give it back to you. And he does that. Saul says to David, be blessed, my son David. You will do great things and surely triumph. And that's great. David went on his way. Saul returned home, but David knew this is never going to end. It said, chapter 27, verse 1 says, David thought to himself, one of these days I will be destroyed by the hand of Saul. I mean, I know that there are times that Saul repents temporarily, but I know that one of these days Saul is going to kill me.
And then David he forms an alliance, an unlikely alliance with the Philistines. So he's going to go to those territories and hang out there for protection.
Very unlikely.
And I think because he knows that Saul is not going to try to capture him when he's with the Philistines, because Philistines, they have a mighty army. And so David finds some refuge in this alliance with the Philistines.
Right. Which,
that's basically chapter 27. Is that?
This is kind of strange because this is the same place where earlier Gath, the same place where they were suspecting David, didn't want him to come there. But that's where David goes back in chapter 27, and with Achish, the son of Moab, king of Gath, and then he makes an alliance, as you say. And while he's there in peace locally, he goes out and raids some of the.
He's kind of fighting for the Philistines.
Cities around.
And so he's really making friends with this one particular Philistine king.
Okay, and he gives him his own town, Ziklag, and David says, and it's not right for us to just be on top of you all the time. Give me somewhere else we can stay. And so they are given the town of Ziklag, which kind of makes headquarters for a while. Chapter 28 is a very interesting chapter, a little bit difficult chapter because even though we find in the Old Testament and the Bible in general that sorcery and mediums and all that kind of thing are condemned, we find here that there was still at least one medium in the land, even after God's commandments to cast them all out, and they hadn't cast them all out. When Saul came in, one good thing he did was it says he cast out these folks from out of the land, but there was still some in hiding, I guess.
Right.
And there
the
was
underground.
one in Endor.
Yeah.
And Saul goes looking for it. So I need somebody to tell me what.
Well, Samuel is dead.
What the Lord's will is. I need to talk to Samuel because he had not been. He said in verse 6. He inquired of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer him by dreams or Urim, which was with the ephod, and the Urim and Thummim, which the way they predicted things, or the prophets. He says, I've just been looking every way for the Lord to tell me what to do.
Not getting any word.
I'm not getting any word from the Lord. So I would really like to talk to Samuel.
Yeah.
Of course, Samuel's already dead.
Yeah.
So he finds this medium. And convinces her.
And Saul disguises himself. Of course, she's going to see through that disguise later on. But.
Yes, but she doesn't. If Saul comes to her as King Saul, she's even going to deny being a medium,
right?
Because
she thinks it's
against the law, and she'd be in trouble.
Right.
But he disguises himself. She does what he asked. Samuel comes forth, says, "Why have you disturbed me? I was doing fine, I was enjoying my rest."
Exactly.
But why have you disturbed me? Saul says, "I need to know. Should I attack? What's going to happen to me? The Philistines are fighting against me. The Lord won't answer me." Verse 16, Samuel said, "Why do you consult me? Now the Lord has turned away from you and become your enemy."
Yeah, I like that response.
The Lord has done what he predicted through me. I mean, it's coming to pass just as you were told. It's taken a while.
Yeah, it's almost like Samuel was saying, "Saul, why didn't you didn't come to me often when I was alive, and now you're asking my advice?" Yeah. Well, he's confirming what he had already prophesied, and so in this debate, is this real? Is this, did she really conjure up the spirit of Samuel? All these questions are beyond our discussion here today. But I think one thing is critical is that whatever this medium does, it doesn't conflict with what has already been said. And so it's not as if new information is given or conflicting information is given. It is just a confirmation of what the Lord has already.
No new revelation.
No new news here.
Yeah,
no.
Yeah, okay.
Now, I told you when I was alive. I'm telling you now when I'm dead. Yeah. You're going to fall.
Okay. Yeah. And of course, when Saul hears this, he's scared to death.
Oh, yeah.
He's so frightened, says that he couldn't eat.
Right.
The woman convinces him.
Yeah.
You need something to eat.
Yeah. So
and his men that were with him convinced him. They finally convinced him to eat something. Yeah. But then later that night he left. Okay. Chapter 29, Achish sends David back to Ziklag. That's the town that he'd given him, and he goes back there.
The Philistines are going to attack, and it seems as if David is going to assist the Philistines in this raid on the Israelites, and that's when this one Philistine king that David's been hanging out with is all for it, but there are some other Philistine kings that say, "Now, we're not going to take this David. We don't know. We can't really trust him." Right. And so then David is basically told, "I'm sorry, you can't fight this battle. We're going to take this all by ourselves."
Yeah, Achish trusts him now. He's been with him a long time, and he trusts him. He said, "You just go to the battle with me, be a part of my army."
Yeah.
And
I find it surprising that David is willing to go up and fight this battle.
It is strange. Yeah. It is strange. Yeah. But he was willing to go. I guess if he wasn't going to take Saul's life himself, he's already shown that, but he's been supportive of the man who's hosted him. Yeah. But when they get there, the rest of the commanders of the Philistines said, "What's this guy doing with you? We can't trust him."
Yeah, he's
so they
still remember the Goliath story.
They're not going to allow.
But I see that David, that God is almost protecting David, because this raid by the Philistines is going to result in the death of Saul and Jonathan. And had David had his own way, he would have definitely been involved in it, and the blood of Saul and Jonathan would have been in some part on his hands. And so perhaps God is protecting David from being involved in this ultimate defeat of Saul.
Not only that, but it was providential, because when he sent back home, Achan says, just going back home.
Yeah.
When they get back, they find out the city's just been burned.
That city's been raided.
The
Ziklag.
Amalekites have taken off all the women and children.
Right.
And David,
including his wives, his two wives.
His men are just totally destroyed, just heartbroken.
Right.
It says they weep till they don't have the strength to weep any longer. They're just torn completely up. But they had gotten back, very shortly after the attack. And so after he recovers a little bit, he consults with the priest. Says, I want to know if it's the Lord's will that I should chase after these people. Folks.
Right.
Or am I just wasting my time or what?
Yeah.
And so he consults and says, pursue them.
Go after them.
You'll be successful.
He does. He catches them. He gets everything back. And now David's a hero again in Ziklag.
He does. He brings back, not only does he bring back his wife, the wives and the children.
Yeah.
He had to leave a third of the men, 200 of the men on the way, because they were just too tired to go any farther. They stayed with the baggage and the supplies. And after the victory, they've also got a lot of plunder. Cattle, goats, sheep, whatever. And so they're bringing all the stuff back. And David's going to give part of the plunder to these guys. The other soldiers say, no, they didn't go. So David established the rule: the ones that stay with the supplies get their share, just like everybody.
They get equal shares as well.
A kind of a principle that was put in place by David.
Yep.
And
not only that, here, chapter 31.
But before we get to 31,
I'm trying to move you along.
The end of 30, I appreciate that. But the end of 30, it's interesting to me that David also wanted to give some of the plunder in verse 26 to the elders of Judah who were his friends.
Yeah.
Among the people of Judah, even though Saul is their king, a lot of them are friendly toward David. And so he sends presents, and it mentions about 13 different places there around Judah where he knows the elders of the cities and sends them gifts.
Keeping those connections
alive.
The southern tribe.
Okay, 31 then, Saul takes his life, Saul and Jonathan on Mount Gilboa. First, just Saul's sons are killed, and then Saul himself sees that he doesn't have a chance. He's going to be taken by the Philistines. He asks his armor bearer to kill him. The armor bearer says, I can't do it. Yeah. And so he falls on his own sword.
Right.
And that was sad. He's beheaded. His body's hung on a wall, and along with those of his sons. And some of the men from Jabesh Gilead hear about it, and valiant men, it says, go and take the body down and came and buried it.
Last summer, I got to go to Beth Shan. That was really neat. And to read this story. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow, that ancient city.
So that's a very, very sad ending to Saul's life.
Yeah.
Saul had the opportunity to be the first king of Israel. He had the Lord was with him, but he wasn't obedient.
Yeah.
And lots of terrible consequences.
Yeah.
Okay. 2 Samuel 1 and 2, we find that when David hears of Saul's death, he's very torn up. A young Amalekite who had been on the mountain Gilboa. Apparently, he was like a mercenary in the Philistine army, and he comes and says, "I was there." I said, "I'm bringing you Saul's crown and his armband." He brings those to David, recognizing him as the king. But he said, when I found Saul, he wasn't quite dead. He had fallen on his sword, but he begged me to kill him, so I did. David said, well, you shouldn't have done
You
that.
shouldn't have done
And so it's sad.
David has
because,
him
here's
killed.
this young man who apparently acted in good faith and trying to be merciful.
Yeah.
And Saul was still in David's mind, the Lord's anointed, and you should not have taken his.
All right. This guy may have been trying to weasel his way into David's
may have
good
been,
favor
yeah.
too. I'm judging him there.
You wonder about his motives, but
Yeah,
he did bring David the crown. But I think that was worth something. Anyway, the last part of chapter 1 is David's lament. Very beautiful lament, and it's comparable to the Psalms.
Yep.
And worth reading, but we can't do it justice right now.
How the mighty have fallen.
How the mighty
have fallen.
Yeah. And so then David moves from Ziklag to Hebron, and there he reigns for 7 years in Hebron. The people of Judah anoint him, recognize him as king.
Which is more in the southern kingdom. And now we're beginning to see foreshadowing of a division in the kingdom. It's still 80 years away or so, but you can see the north and the south. There's a different political.
The north hasn't accepted him yet. They eventually will.
They will.
They haven't yet. Right. But for a long time there was continuing war between the house of Saul and the house of David.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Abner makes Ishbosheth, Saul's son. He anoints him king over Israel. Yeah. And so we do have at this period, we really have 2 kings, I guess, over the people of Israel.
And it says in chapter 3, verse 1, the war between the house of Saul and the house of David lasted a long time. David grew stronger and stronger, while the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker. Mm-hmm. So that's where we'll take that up next week.
All right. Okay. All right. So David is going to be king. Saul is dead. Samuel is dead. And it's going to be the golden era, really, of the Israelite nation with David as king. All right. So let's switch gears here and go to John chapter 9 and pick up the story of John's account of Jesus's ministry. All right, first event, Jesus is going to run across a man who was blind from birth, and that's going to bring up some questions about why that's happened. And of course, Jesus is gonna perform one of his miracles.
Okay. First of all, his disciples asked Jesus, "Why is this man blind? Right. Because of some sin of his or his parents?" Mm-hmm. And Jesus said, "Neither one. So the glory of God may be made manifest, or the work of God might be made manifest in his life." Right. And then we find that Jesus did heal him. He spat on the ground, made some mud, applied it to his eyes, told him to go wash in the pool of Siloam. He did. And he can see.
Right.
Been blind all of his life, but now he can see. Yeah. His neighbors say, "Look at him.
Is that the right guy?"
And then someone said, "No, it looks like him, but it can't be him." Okay?
Right.
Yeah. Then, of course, the leaders want to know, well, what happened? How were your eyes open?
It's the Sabbath again. Another Sabbath miracle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jesus had a habit of doing that, didn't he?
He does.
The man they called Jesus made some mud, put it on my eyes, told me to go wash his Siloam and wash. I really enjoy the quotes that come from the blind man.
Yeah.
They're simple,
I was blind, I can see.
And cannot be defeated by the Pharisees. I mean, they can't win any argument with the man. He's pretty bold with the Pharisees.
Yeah.
Okay.
You call him, you say he's of the evil one. I don't how can someone evil make me see?
Yeah. They asked him later, he said, "Well, how could he do this?" And he says, "Well, I don't know." He said, "One thing I know, I was blind, but now I see."
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. There are the facts.
And then when they come to him again, say, "Where is he? Who is he?" He said, "Oh, well, do you want to become his disciples too?" Finally, when they say, "We don't even know where this guy is from," he says, "Well, that's remarkable. You don't know where he's from, and yet he opened my eyes." Yeah. And so it's just really neat to see that interchange. Of course, they cast him out of the synagogue.
Right,
his parents wouldn't get involved in the discussion.
We don't know. Ask him. He's of age.
They were afraid that they'd be cast out of the synagogue. Right.
Which is basically being ostracized from society.
Only thing that they could do with this blind man at the end was to tell him, as far as the arguments, they say, well, who are you to be lecturing us?
Right.
So when
You were steeped in sin at
win
birth.
an argument, you just get mad.
Just call names, right?
That's right.
That never happens, does it?
Okay.
But this guy does. Jesus does seek this man out in the temple. Was it in the temple courts here?
Yes.
I forget. But Jesus goes and finds this person and reveals to him that he is the Messiah. And this blind person, previously didn't really give Jesus credit as Messiah, does recognize him and
yes, he didn't know he really didn't know who Jesus was. But when Jesus says, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" Well, who is it? I'm He.
Yeah.
I believe.
I believe. That was impressive that Jesus takes the initiative to find this guy and reconnect with him.
Jesus mentions the fact that I have come into the world so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind.
Yeah.
Pharisees over here, are you saying that we're blind? Jesus said, if you were blind, you would not be guilty.
Right.
You'd not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains. So, it's not that you can't see. You just don't want to know. You don't want to know the truth.
Right.
You say you can see, so you are guilty. You are guilty.
You can't see right in front of you who is here.
Right. Yeah. Chapter 10. Okay.
The Good Shepherd.
Wonderful story or wonderful chapter. Jesus says he's the shepherd of the sheep. He also says he's the gate into the sheepfold. Two different ways of looking at Jesus. When he says he's the gate to the sheepfold, I think he's saying very clearly there's no other way into God's fold except through him. I am the way, the truth, and the life.
No one comes up here next week's reading
except by me. Tell us a few chapters later. And then when he says he's the good shepherd, that's just a beautiful picture of how he depicts the relationship between a shepherd and his sheep.
Right. They know my voice. I lay down my life for the sheep. Right. The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come to give you life to the full. John 10:10, one of the great promises of the New Testament.
So beautiful passage and reassuring to us when maybe we feel abandoned in life. Jesus said, I'm the good shepherd.
I'm going to take care of you.
I'll take care of you.
Yeah.
I'll lay down my life for you. I know you by name. That's one thing he says. The good shepherd knows his sheep by name. So he knows who Todd is, who Calvin is, and who everybody else is. He knows us by name and cares for us.
Yeah. Okay. And so much of a contrast between the Pharisees and their attitude towards people. Jesus is very gentle, humble, loving to these people.
Yeah. As the chapter goes on, we find a continuation of that conflict with the Pharisees. It says at the Feast of Dedication, which nowadays is known as Hanukkah. Okay. It was winter.
Now, this is a feast that was established in the intertestamental period. So we don't read about this in the Old Testament. This was the Maccabees and the reclaiming of the temple and the Jewish independence. I guess a couple hundred years, I forget the dates, a couple hundred years before Christ.
Yeah, I don't remember the date either, but 200 something, I think. But you're right. It's not found in the Old Testament, but it has become a part of the Jewish tradition. Right. But he was in the temple area and walking in Solomon's colonnade outside along the eastern wall. The Jews gathered around him saying, how long will you keep us in suspense? If you're the Christ, tell us plainly. Well, he's been telling them. But I guess they're just waiting for enough clear words from Jesus that they can totally accuse him and prosecute him for blasphemy and turn the Roman government against him and everything else. So they said, just tell us who you are. So they don't really want to know, but they're trying to get Jesus to say something that they can fall on.
Right, collecting evidence that they can use against him later on.
Okay. Now Jesus tells them basically, I'm in the Father and the Father's in me. That's who I am. I'm God's son. And so they say, they accuse him of blasphemy. Jesus said, well, there's a passage there in Psalms talks about you are all sons of God. What are you going to do? Why are you say I'm blaspheming if I say I'm a son of God? So Jesus turns the scripture against them again. They tried to seize him and he escaped.
Verse 39.
It says again they tried to seize him. This is not the first time. They have made several attempts now to try to capture Jesus. He always gets away because Jesus says, my time has not yet come.
My
when the
hour
time comes,
has not yet come. Right.
He'll be ready.
Right.
Yeah.
Not during this feast. Another feast is when
Yes.
Jesus is going to be handed over.
Yeah. It's interesting. At the very end of chapter 10, it says that Jesus went back across the Jordan to the place where John had been baptizing in the early days. Probably the same place that Jesus himself was baptized.
So he gets out of Jerusalem.
He gets out of Jerusalem, gets over on the other side of the Jordan River. But a lot of people came to him there, and they said, though John never performed a miraculous sign, they're thinking of John the Baptist, just because of the location, though he never performed a miraculous sign, all that John said about this man was true. Okay. Yeah. And many believed in Jesus.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Chapter 11, wonderful story of Lazarus.
Yeah.
Apparently, Jesus had a very special friendship with his family, Mary and Martha and Lazarus.
Yeah.
And they were in Bethany. We know that sometimes Jesus went out and spent the night in Bethany. We assume with them.
Yeah. I think even during Holy Week, at one time he goes out there. It's about 2 miles away from Jerusalem. So
yeah, just
walking
a suburb,
distance.
And so Jesus over on the other side of the Jordan, he gets the word from the sisters that Lazarus is very sick.
Right.
Very sick. And Jesus doesn't do anything. He just waits around for a while.
Yeah.
So he waits a couple days.
2 days. Yeah.
And then he tells his disciples that our friend Lazarus, he calls him our friend Lazarus is sick. Actually, he said our friend Lazarus is sleeping because by then he died. Jesus knew that he had died. It says, for your sake, I'm glad I was not there so that you may believe. Okay, let's go to him. The disciples really didn't want to go back to Jerusalem. Didn't want Jesus to go back.
No.
They say, are you forgetting they were just trying to stone you?
Right.
They were just trying to kill you, and you're going to go back there. But he insists he's going to go back. And so, interestingly, the one that speaks up and says, let's go with him is Thomas.
Yeah.
We sometimes get on Thomas's case as doubting Thomas, but Thomas is the one that says, if he's going to die, we're going to die with him.
Go down with him.
So he convinces the others to go. Okay. And they get back, and Jesus, when he gets to Bethany, Lazarus is already dead. He's been in the tomb for 4 days. And as you said, it's just 2 miles out of Jerusalem. A lot of the people have come out to mourn with the sisters. Apparently, they were a well-known family. Had lots of friends, at least
prominent group
friends.
of people. Yeah,
and people have just come out to mourn and be with Jesus. They do that, and in this context, Jesus, both sisters says, "If you'd been here, our brother wouldn't have died."
Yeah.
Jesus says, "I'm the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he dies, yet shall he live."
Right.
Right. So, of course, he then raises Lazarus up. It's in this context, before he raises Lazarus, seeing the sisters' tears and the tears of all the other people, he's just overwhelmed. And we find that. Favorite memory verse?
Favorite memory verse,
John 11:35.
Jesus wept.
Yeah. So but it is an
he's
important verse.
experiencing the pains of humanity.
Yeah.
When we get to the book of Hebrews, the writer there is going to
Yeah.
drill down to that concept, is that Jesus lived like you and I lived and experienced, and that way he can sympathize with us. Jesus was at the grave of a very dear friend and experienced that grief.
And he knows he's going to raise him, but he hurts with the people.
Oh, yeah.
He feels the compassion.
Yeah.
After this, the Pharisees really made up their mind. They've got to kill Jesus because he's going.
This guy's raising people from the dead. Everyone's going to go following after this dude.
And it even gets to the point that says they decided they're going to kill Lazarus too because he's walking publicity for Jesus. He's there's that guy that Jesus raised from the dead.
Were you really dead?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
4 days.
Yeah.
In the tomb. So yes.
Near the end of that story, their motivation for wanting to get rid of Jesus, they're saying, we don't want the Romans to come and take away our temple and our nation. So, I don't know if that's their main motivation or not, but they're concerned that Jesus is, his talk about the kingdom is going to upset the Romans, and the Romans are going to come in and destroy Jerusalem. And even though they don't have independence, they do have a level of independence. They have their own land, they have their own temple, they can practice their religion, and they see Jesus as a threat to that way of life that they've been enjoying, so to speak.
Sure.
And of course, that way of life is really advantageous for them because they are in the positions of prominence. They're respected.
I think one says the Romans will come and take away our place. It's not just a physical place; it's their place in society. It's their power. It's their, their position. Yeah. So always people in high positions don't want any changes. They like things the way they are. Yeah. Okay, chapter 12. Jesus was anointed by Mary in Bethany, and Judas was critical because she spent that very, very expensive perfume anointing Jesus' feet and drying them with her hair. And Judas says that could have been sold and given to the poor. Right. Of course, he had other ideas what he would do with the money as the treasurer.
Yeah,
but
he helped himself to some of that.
That was his reasoning.
Yeah.
And I might have agreed with Judas at the time. It seemed like an awful waste all that perfume. Yeah. But I think we're being taught here that nothing is too good for Jesus. And Jesus says you'll always have opportunity to help the poor. The poor will be with you always. And so,
and she did what she did was motivated out of a genuine love for Jesus.
Genuine love, and Jesus says she's prepared me for my burial.
Right. This story really has made me more understanding and sympathetic with people who do things, and I think, something else. It would have been much better if we had done this. To recognize that, hey, Jesus is pleased with that service because it was done out of a loving, compassionate heart. And so sometimes we put ourselves in that position of criticizing what everyone else does if they don't agree with us. And maybe, like you said, maybe it wasn't the best use of the money. Yeah. But let's look even deeper than that. Let's look at people's motives and how is Jesus responding to their acts of service. And that does really help me as I kind of look at what other people do. And everyone has a passion, and everyone thinks the church should be dedicated to this. Someone else, we should be dedicated to this. We should be dedicated to this. But we recognize that these different passions are all received with joy by Jesus.
Right.
It's a great story. It's a great lesson.
Love the story. Jesus predicts his death again. He's done it so many times. Predicts his death again in chapter 12. He's going into the city of Jerusalem. He knows he's about to die. Verse 27 has always been jumped out at me. Jesus says, "Now my heart is troubled. What shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it was for this very reason I came to this hour." Yeah. So, Jesus is struggling. His human nature doesn't want to die. And he knows he's going to die. And what should I say? Father, save me from this hour? No. I've come for this purpose. So he's, he's not,
He's got to refocus.
His priority is do his Father's will.
Yeah.
No matter what.
Yeah. So this event in 12 is the Palm Sunday triumphal entry, not quite as a broad description as we find in like Matthew or Luke, but this is the beginning of that last week of Jesus's life once we get into chapter 12.
Right. And he knows it.
Yeah, Jesus knows it. He's coming to Jerusalem this time.
Yeah.
He's not going to leave.
That's right.
He's going to be killed. He's going to leave eventually
His
as
disciples
a risen
are right.
Savior.
If you go back, it'll be your last time.
Yeah.
And they were right about that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on over to chapter 13. Jesus washed the disciples' feet. When he got together with them at the Passover feast, we find that he washed their feet and did it as an example for his disciples.
Yeah.
Said that no servant is greater than his master. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a beautiful story, but it's not just beautiful to know. It's something we need to find to put in practice.
If your master is doing this for you, for the servant, how much more should the servant be willing to humble themselves and wash feet of others? Yeah.
So we need to be finding ways of washing one another's feet, of serving people's needs, and no matter what their status in life is and what ours might be, we need to be servants.
Yeah. And Judas, it's been revealed that Judas is going to be the one that betrays Jesus. Judas is one of those whose feet are going to be washed.
Right. Even Judas' feet.
Can you imagine that?
Even Judas' feet.
That heart that
and
Jesus
knows it very well and predicts that here at the supper.
Yeah.
Judas is the one that's going to do it. The other disciples don't understand what Jesus is talking about, but Judas knows.
Right. Yeah.
And he goes to do what he has to do.
Yeah.
And Jesus also tells Peter that he's going to deny him 3 times, even though Peter says, "I'll lay down my life for you." Jesus said, before morning comes, you will deny me 3 times. We'll see the rest of this, what Jesus has to say at that Last Supper.
Mm-hmm. So they're in the upper room.
Next week.
It's Thursday night, I guess it would be. And then, of course, he's going to have a long discussion here with the apostles about the hope that is still out there, even though he's going to be leaving. All right, Calvin, thank you very much. We will continue 2 Samuel and more exploits of David.
See you next week.
And then we'll wrap up the Gospel of John. So keep it up, and we'll see you next week in our daily Bible reading.
Yeah, we still took 50 minutes.